The next section, 2.2, is on mysticism. Now, in the modern period in Greece, we don't have very many specimens of actual Kabbalistic essays, let's say. So we know about in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, the classic Kabbalistic tales about Yosef Karo, but we don't know, it's like in terms of the Chavurot, in terms of the actual study groups, documents and excerpts of Kabbalistic practices that they actually practice. What I'm going to tell you here is how some Kabbalistic motifs are intertwined in amulets, charms. This may sound like it's superstition, but they're actually acceptable folk beliefs, and amongst some of the greatest minds that we have in Jerusalem in academia, magic and charms and writing amulets does have a legitimate religious Kabbalistic aspect. Okay, in the city of Yanina, amongst the Romanio Jews, they were goldsmiths, and they have many ornamentations with the name of God Shaddai written on silver pieces of ornaments, let's say maybe a Magen David or something round, and put on the parochet, put on the curtain of the Aron HaKodesh, of the Ark. So in the Israel Museum, there are many specimens. I made a film on the Jews of Yanina, and it was aired in 1989, which showed the Shaddai in the museum of the Romanio Jewry in Broome Street in New York. You have examples of the Shaddai. One of the researchers of Yanina Jewry, she passed away. Her name was Rachel Dalvin. She wrote two excerpts about amulets, which I want to read to you. The Yanina Jews used a small number of amulets, charms, and remedies, some of which were uniquely their own, for prophylactic or curative power. Amulets worn on a ribbon around the neck, but outside the garment. The most widely used of these is known as the Shaddai, consisting of a piece of silver, gold, and other metal, shaped like a hand, a Star of David, or some other form of religious symbol, with the word Shaddai engraved in Hebrew letters on it. The kinds of amulets were worn around the neck but concealed beneath the garment. The duga, generally made of silver and attached to a string, contained the names of angels to protect the wearer from worry. The kamea, which was made from virtually any material, including parchment, was worn to protect the wearer from illness or accident. Inserted in the kamea was the name of God, a prayer, or the names of the angels. Shlomo Alkabetz was born in Salonika. He was famous because he composed the prayer Lecha Dodi. Him and his peer Yosef Karo were part of a whole wave of Salonican rabbinic and religious figures who made Aliyah to Safed, to Tzfat, and they instituted the whole Kabbalat Shabbat service, which is part of the whole prayer for the Jewish people, not just the Sephardic Jews. I want to read to you a few things about mystical elements of Shlomo Alkabetz. Shlomo Alkabetz wrote a letter to his friends in Salonika, urging them to follow him to Eretz Yisrael. In his published Dvar Torah, his Torah speech about the weekly Torah portion, Alkabetz explains his Aliyah to Israel based on the verse about donations to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, in the desert, inviting all whose heart moves them to join in building the Mishkan here, interpreted as Eretz Yisrael, where God dwells. Making Aliyah is designed to help the tikkun, the repair of the human condition, and return the people to their original state of spiritual vision. Thus, paradoxically, physical acts like building the Mishkan and like making Aliyah are essential for preparing for the Shekhinah, That's the female imagery of God. In the letter, he urges his friends, wake up, be strong, and of courage to do our Creator's work. For as we understand from the Maggid, the spiritual messenger, who came to Rabbi Joseph Karo on the first night of Shavuot, you, some of you, or all of you, are destined to do God's work. Therefore, Yosef Karo and I are going to settle in Eretz Israel. But don't you worry about your financial interest here, for the time of the songbird has arrived. That's Shir Shirim, the Psalm of Psalms. So open your eyes. You have no time to delay. My heart is burning with me, for it is God's will to show me something great. So hurry. But may God allow me to be reunited with you on Holy Land to serve God shoulder to shoulder. Now, there were disciples of all these mystics from Yanina, and I actually knew one in Salonika. His name was Shmuel HaKohen. Well, he lived his life. He had a job, but he also was in a study group. It was very difficult to understand him talk because everything was Zohar and concepts, and he might make a point, but you had to know a lot of Kabbalah to understand what his point was. So he just is like giving you the final conclusion, and you had no idea how he reached this. But it was a living culture. Most of it died in the Holocaust, but there were Mekubalim even from the Greek peninsula, from Salonika and other religious communities that made Aliyah and were part of, there was a yeshiva, a mystical yeshiva in Jerusalem called Beit El. Okay, now, there are remedies which are thought of as wives' tales, but this is part of Sephardic tradition, and it also has a mystical Kabbalistic element. So the Magen David, the Star of David, they drew the Jewish emblem of inverted triangles forming the six-pointed star on 2 sheets of paper and wrote in the center in Hebrew 2 words, Magen David, Shield of David, and on the 6 points of the star, the 6 letters making up the 2 words. Both papers prepared in this way, called in Judeo-Spanish papileras, were placed on both cheeks and held by a scarf or a handkerchief. These papileras were also used in cases of contagious illnesses of mumps, from whence the expressions of having mumps originated. Tiene papileras and se operó de papileras. He has papileras and he had surgery, an operation of papileras. That was quoted from Michael Molcho, who was a historian and a rabbi of Salonican Jewry and actually miraculously survived the Holocaust. So, for the Kabbalists, the 6 points of the double triangle signified the heavens, the earth, and the 4 cardinal points. In their writings, some rabbis of the early 18th century spoke of the papileras and its miraculous virtues. Kabbalah in preventing miscarriages. When a woman suffered frequent miscarriages, they would hang on the 4 corners of the bed amulets containing parchments on which Kabbalistic and magical words were written. In addition, they tied other amulets around their lower body. On occasions, they would adopt another practice. They would take a linen cord and wrap it 7 times around the tomb of a rabbi renowned for his saintliness. And that's in the old large cemetery of Salonika that was destroyed by the Nazis in 1943. They would then wrap the cord around the lower part of the pregnant woman's body and keep it there until the moment of birth. This cord, impregnated with saintliness, would protect the fetus until this normal delivery. The type of cord, which was called the defenedor, could then be used by other women who were suffering from miscarriages. Okay, this is also taken from Michael Molcho. Also, I'm going to quote Molcho talking about practices of magic in Salonika, and then I'm going to talk about the people who actually performed the magical spells. The city of Salonika was very important as a center of Jewish and secular culture during the 16th century. Astronomers, poets, and physicians of high standings had found refuge in our city. Alongside the study of Talmud, they studied medicine and natural sciences in the academies. However, at the beginning of the 18th century, an intellectual decline took place, which accelerated rapidly. In the 18th century, the study of Kabbalah, with all its formulas and ridiculous practices, invaded the community. I won't comment on his bias, but that's a different issue. The whole atmosphere was pervaded with mysticism. The Salonican Jews sank into a state of medieval ignorance. This is also the effect of the false Messiah Shabtai Tzvi, a century or two earlier. They did not wake up from their lethargy until the last quarter of the 19th century, thanks to the beneficial actions of the school of the Alliance. For more than 2 centuries, the Jewish population believed in the power of fortune tellers and magicians, who utilized the hidden forces to fend off misfortune through the use of amulets and charms, to foretell the future and to cure deadly illness. Okay, now, there's what's called in the Judeo-Spanish the indulco, magical spells. There was a time when the populace attributed all maladies to 2 main causes, fear and the evil eye. So the remedies of these healers of the East are direct descendants of magical practices in fashion during the Middle Ages. Incantations, exorcism, and Kabbalistic formulas were all accompanied by mysterious symbolic practices and resulted, according to common belief, in miraculous benefits in cases where science proved to be ineffective. Amongst these practices, the indulco, the magical spell, is the most powerful. I'll just give you a short excerpt of part of the ceremony. The undas indulcadera, who is usually a bent old woman who pronounces the magic formulas through a toothless mouth, will take a sieve in which she places a shirt of the sick person and an egg. Her next act is to take a small jar in which she pours a little water, pronouncing the name of the patient. And it goes on and on. At each operation, the old woman would use 3 new pieces of lead added to the existing pieces. The 3 pieces would become 6 and then 9, and every addition with ad hoc formulas she would invoke with the help of the patriarchs, usually a rabbi or a very religious person or a mystic, and certain other miraculous pious men. Finally, the egg, which, as we have noted, is in the sieve, is now transferred to the jar. The patient is expected to crack the egg into the jar with his right hand. The water holding the yolk and the white of the egg now has special properties according to the popular belief. With this mixture, the patient is expected to wash his face. And it goes on, and there are many different steps. This sounds like a bunch of superstitious hogwash, but this is part of the Sephardic culture. But to put it in a more analytic but actually practical way, in Jerusalem, there was a family which also came from the region, from Salonika in Monastir, who had all sorts of these practices, and one of their descendants, his name was Beni Nachmias, wrote a book called Chamsa, of various Jerusalem Sephardic remedies, which for all sorts of ailments. So the remedies were also natural plants, for example, and spices, but the remedies also were religious and ceremonial, and part of the ceremonies were from Kabbalistic rituals and phrases and incantations, let's say, put in parchment and encapsulated in various places. So, for example, I interviewed once a Sephardic Jew who survived the Holocaust from Salonika, and he had an amulet wrapped. It wasn't like the Shema, or it wasn't like the parchment of a mezuzah. It was a mystical, let's say, essay to protect him from the evil eye. And after the Holocaust, he wore this under his shirt. He didn't see it. He never saw it. He took it out for me just to show me. And he wore it till his death.